So now we're going to have our panel discussion on leaders everywhere, and Jeffrey Lancaster is going to lead us. He's the Emerging Technologies Coordinator for the Science and Engineering Libraries here at Columbia.
Welcome to the panel discussion. We know that we are sitting between you and lunch, so hopefully this will be entertaining. This is also hopefully going to be a bit of a safe space discussion. We just now realized maybe part of being a leader is taking risks. So 3 of our bosses and numerous other administrators are actually in the room. So hopefully we'll all have jobs after this, I think was the sentiment. So just a little bit of logistics about the way the panel will go. I've asked each of the panelists to introduce themselves using one slide in about 2 to 3 minutes. So we should run through those fairly quickly. I've got a list of about 5 or 6 questions that I want to ask that will hopefully get the discussion going. And then we really want you to be involved. And so throughout the comments, we hope that you will be thinking about questions that you might have. We will be responding to some of what was said earlier in the day and then also bringing up some other issues. So please feel free either to circle back around to something that you heard earlier this morning or to bring up your own questions if we haven't touched upon something that you're particularly interested in. And so that will carry us through to lunch, and then we'll get everybody fed. So with that, if this goes, which it should, Karen.
Oh, that's me. I'm up. Hi. First, thanks for having me here. So I was a college dropout at 18, and then I became a bartender, because this is what you do. I was a bartender for 15 years, and it taught me a lot. It taught me how to handle difficult people. It taught me how to disagree while smiling. I was listening this morning. And then I went back to school, and I majored in medieval and Renaissance studies at NYU. And I got a full fellowship to come here to Columbia to do a PhD in medieval history, which I did not complete. Do you notice the kind of trend here? But I also was a comics fan my whole life, and I put up the Bayeux Tapestry as kind of the bridge between those two things, because if you think about medieval visual culture, then you see its sequential visual narrative. So I became the librarian for ancient and medieval history here at Columbia in 2002. I realized that we didn't have comic books or graphic novels in the library in 2004. We had 3, actually, Mouse, Persepolis, and Palestine. They were all on reserve. And I thought, oh, we should maybe have those. And it was, to a certain extent, driven by enlightened self-interest. I wanted to be able to check graphic novels out of the library instead of paying for them, because I'm a librarian, and so I don't make a lot of money. But there were other reasons, which were the ones that I actually used to pitch this. And now we have many, many. That's just one little tiny, tiny fraction of the bookshelves. We have over 4,200 titles now in the collection in many, many languages. Thank you to my global studies colleagues for that. And in 2010, I expanded my role into collecting creator archives. That's a picture of Dennis Kitchen's archives in his home in Northampton, Massachusetts. How am I doing on time?
Doing great.
Excellent. Okay, next. Tag.
So I'm Stephen Francoeur. I'm a user experience librarian at Baruch College. Before I was a librarian, I worked in book publishing, and then as a development officer in fundraising. So this is my 3rd career, and it's the one I'm going to stick with forever and ever. I started library school in '99 at Pratt and got an internship at Baruch. And I've been at Baruch ever since. I started off in information services, and I was there for about 10 years working in reference and instruction. And one of the early projects I got tapped to work on was to help launch a chat reference service at our college. And it was a whole ton of fun to get that up and running and then expand it to share it with other, the service with other CUNY libraries. And give me a lot of experience working not just with our own users, but users around the United States, because this was the Question Point Cooperative Service. In the midst of all this work doing reference and instruction, I was asked to serve on a web redesign committee. And generally, if you ask people about what their experience was like, they'll grimace and usually run away. Web redesign committees can be really painful. Everyone's got an agenda. I want this, I want that, and they're bitter battles. But I was really engaged by it and learned a little bit from our web coordinator about usability testing. And it was a nice marriage of my interests in working directly with users and trying to take that knowledge to adjust systems and tweak them and make them align better with our users' expectations. So in 2010 or 11, my chief librarian, who had always been very supportive in an annual review, asked me, what do you want to do with your career? What things would you like to be doing? And I thought back on my experience redesigning the website and doing usability testing and realized that that was where some of my real interest was, and taking that deep knowledge of who our users are and trying to translate that into better services and resources for our college. So I had to work with him to create a new position, and that's where I've been since 2011 as a UX librarian. I shifted out of information services over into collection management, and part of the bargain of moving to collection management was that I would help out with management of electronic resources, which was nice because that meant I got to take my UX insights and start tweaking our endlessly all the different interfaces that we have access to for this database and that discovery tool and the catalog, and the list goes on and on.
So, I'm Kelly, and I wear a lot of hats. I thought I could start this presentation off. I can tell you very briefly about what I do right now, along with my actual titles, but I also wanted to kind of give you a visual display of the stuff that I really do day to day. So I'm the Associate Director for Public Services at the Center for Science and Social Science Information at Yale University. It's a hybrid organization between University ITS and the library, and the first type of hybrid organization to work in the system. So it actually presents a lot of different opportunities to work with two very different cultures within the university. So I thought I would start off with a picture of me in a witch's hat, which actually represents one of my favorite parts of being a leader and a manager, and that's working with so many different colleagues, both as my supervisors, as my peers, and also with the staff who actually report to me. This was actually an initiative that was suggested by one of my peers. In the center where I work, we have LCD screens where we post hours, workshops, and then also pages of all of the librarians with pictures, contact information, and wordles that represent the different tasks or functions that we do. So for Halloween, we kind of dressed this up a little bit, thus the witch's hat, and we made wordles kind of off of what we usually have on them, the different tasks. So I had access services, the ACTS, interlibrary MOAN, we had voodoo, instruction, and reference spells. So that's a really fun, creative part of my job that I enjoy a lot. I also get to make sure that the toilets are working, another part of being a manager, really fun part. A whiteboard is up in the top left, and the whiteboard, we get a lot of feedback from our students telling us what they'd like. So again, part of being a leader and a manager is making sure that we're responding to what our users want. So for example, they told us that they wanted more study tables and chairs in the lower level, also whiteboards. So we made sure that those kinds of things, ended up happening as a result of the input that they gave us. I also helped to arrange game nights, bottom left there. We have game nights at the end of every semester. We have a really large LCD screen, and we get a lot of pizza, and students come in. It's very popular. We have grad students from the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies who have a very competitive spirit, and they love Dance Dance Revolution. So it's very cute. I get to issue a lot of golden stars and public accolades from all of the great work that the center does. Occasionally a demerit or two, but not very often. And then the kind of center picture is what I really feel that I have to do a lot of in my job. So I can be kind of up there on the top some days. I can be balancing in the middle other days, and at the bottom, sometimes I feel like I'm holding a lot of things together in a nice little balance. The picture of the supermom down here, that's a card that my teenage son made for me about 6 years ago. And I keep that posted just because it's really important for me to be a leader and a manager in the house too. And it also just kind of helps me to feel better at work when I'm having a tough day as a leader and a manager. So, supermom.
Thank you. So I wanted to just take a brief second to talk about this question of emerging technologies coordinator and what it means. Star mentioned that I got my PhD in chemistry about 2.5 years ago and then transitioned into the libraries. So I actually want to use this as an example of kind of some of the challenges that we've been facing. So I came in and I started with all these great ideas, right? And I wanted to do all of these different things. And so I got to do some of those ideas initially, and then after a while, we needed to start writing maybe a 2-page description of that idea in order to send it up the chain and have it get approval and come back down. And so I said, okay, and I started doing that. And then after a while, we said, okay, well, we're doing a lot of these. How do they fit together, and what's the picture that you're actually trying to build from doing all of this stuff? So I wanted to share that picture with you. What we're finding is that emerging technologies, as we're approaching them, are falling into 3 areas. One is professional development, one is new modes of research, and one is outreach. And so then on top of this are all of these other things that were sort of starting out as ideas, which then are growing into something of like a strategic plan, or what was it, as a strategic thinking and design, which I kind of liked, for how we proceed with a lot of this. So we're doing a number of different things, looking at how to support researchers and what they do. Everything from teaching researchers how to code and what good practices around code, looking at researchers who share code and share data and making them examples to then use them to then encourage other researchers to do things like that. Bringing in new physical technologies, everything from Arduinos and open source hardware, 3D printing, hopefully some gaming technologies, things like that. So a lot of this is still sort of in the proposal phase. Some of this has actually happened, but I just sort of wanted to give you an idea of what my really cool job title actually entails. So, jumping into things, I didn't know what order we were going to be in, and I got us in the right order, which is kind of great.
And I'm wearing the same shirt.
And I'm wearing the same shirt.
And I'm wearing the same outfit as well.
So, we have one dress outfit that we use for this.
Our panel clothing.
I was worried I was going to do the same thing. So, to jump into this, I was at a conference last week and the week before, and there was an investor there who said that he wanted to invest $60,000 into a company. And his advisors were telling him to do this $300,000 feasibility study before he invested $60,000 into it. And he said, that doesn't make sense. He said, I'd rather invest the $60,000 and fail and get a fact than spend a lot more money to sort of know what's going to happen. So I wanted to touch on this question of leaders as change agents, leaders as people who are willing to step outside of maybe the way that things are normally done to try doing something a different way. And maybe you can each sort of talk about a time when you've had to step outside of the way that things were normally done in order to accomplish something maybe that was an idea, maybe was something that you thought needed to happen for the betterment of the organization.
Yeah, okay. I can do that.
Okay.
So, I covered that a little bit in my introduction. I was the librarian for ancient and medieval history. I'm still the librarian for ancient and medieval history. But in 2005, I proposed this initiative that we collect graphic novels in the library. And I brought together a lot of people, actually, who are still in this room. I brought together the fine arts librarian, the American studies librarian, the rare books librarian, our assistant head of collection development, and my supervisor, the director of the history and humanities divisions. But what I did before I brought everyone together was I met with everybody individually to sound them out. Because you know that thing they say about trial lawyers, you're never supposed to ask a question you don't already know the answer to? That was my feeling about going into this meeting. I wanted to make sure that that I wasn't going to get sabotaged by a lot of people kind of throwing tomatoes at me. And it wasn't necessarily seen as an obvious development, but nobody had an objection to it, I guess you'd say. And I definitely never thought that it would become as focal an element of my work as it is now. But I think that just asking All they can do is say no. Just asking, and I received. Ask and you shall receive.
Yeah.
It worked.
That's a really good strategy. One of the things I wanted us to touch on are sort of strategies. So the one is bringing people together around the idea and sort of making sure to establish those connections beforehand. And you might get some pushback at some point along the road, and I'm sure you have. No? Oh.
This is the most incredibly supportive institution you can imagine. I have literally had nothing but encouragement and support for these last 8 years.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Stephen, how about a time? Yeah.
So when we started our chat service in 2001, it was just a local service. And in that time, that was when the very first chat reference cooperatives were being formed. And a cooperative based in California came up with this great idea that wouldn't it be cool if we could do this around the clock. We would staff, get people that could work at 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, Thanksgiving, Christmas. And the libraries that are part of the cooperative could get 24/7 coverage. And there was a lot of pushback saying, well, what's the point? Who's ever on? We can see, we're getting service. People are coming in between 10 and 2 or 2 and 4, and that's all well and good. Why bother? And I said, well, we'll never know what kind of traffic we'll get unless we just open it up. So with the help of the chief librarian, we sort of decided to pitch it as a pilot. And that's what Elliot mentioned, it's the best advice. Everything gets pitched as a pilot. And 12 years later, we're still doing this pilot. Well, at this point, it's no longer a pilot. But it took a lot of experimenting and sharing of the data from the actual usage of the service to say, no, look, it really is worth it. And it's an incredible bang for the buck. And it was an economic proposition. At the time, Baruch had to staff the service 8 hours a week, and the other 160 hours were getting covered by other librarians around the country. And the quality of the service was good enough, especially for 3 in the morning, was good enough that we could live with the fact that the people helping our Baruch students weren't necessarily experts in all the policies and procedures of our library. But it did take a lot of work to continually share the data and also start to just do lots of presentations and outreach to not just in Baruch, but then across CUNY, because then I also wanted to get other CUNY libraries to join us in our subscription. By sharing a subscription, the price would go down, so we had a great incentive. Plus, I thought it was such a magical thing to have chat reference. I really wanted to share this with all the other CUNY libraries, and every chance I could, I tried to help advocate for the great value of the service, that with a minimal weekly contribution, you get this incredible return. And over time, we got up to 7 or 8 libraries sharing our subscription, and our price just continued to go down. But it was a lot of pushback and resistance that had to be overcome.
And I think part of that was starting with a really good question. How will we know what the answer is? And that idea of experimentality was brought up earlier. Do you have?
Yes,
Yeah,
I do.
great.
So about 7 years or so ago, we decided to do away with our reference desk and have just a combined service point, the information desk. And while I think most libraries have that kind of model or some permutation of it, that was kind of a big deal at Yale 7 years ago. So I think we had about 6 different reference desks that were operating in different subject libraries, and at that point it was just the social science libraries before the actual combined library happened, or the combined center. And so we had different discussions with the librarians there, and there was some pushback from some of the librarians who had been there for quite a few years. But we gave them ample time to understand that this change was happening. Still, there were some kind of feet dragging through the sand, but one day we just decided the desk is going. And so we literally took the desk up, my supervisor and I, and put it behind a concrete wall. Luckily enough, we did. Put it behind a concrete wall, even though we couldn't get facilities there to pick it up, but we just said, we've got to do this. It's never going to be an easier time. So we did it, and our circulation staff were properly trained, and we moved over to the model. And it was fantastic. The librarians, I think, a year later, once they looked at their statistics and saw that the number of consultations citations that they were getting from the patrons, I think, quadrupled. It was, deemed a success, but it was really, really difficult, very painful going through it.
So sometimes you just have to pull the trigger, right?
You do.
Sometimes you just have to, you build that
Move
coalition.
the desk.
And then you move the desk, and then you
Yeah.
take it out piece by piece so that nobody notices that it's
Exactly.
actually gone. The next question that I want to ask has to do with barriers, and both the types of barriers that you've encountered, either when you've been trying to lead or trying to enact a change, how you've overcome those, and maybe if there's been a time where you've had to stand down because of a barrier. So whether there was something that you came up against that you said, right now is not the best time, maybe we'll come back and visit this later, but we'll put our energy somewhere else. Does that resonate, Stephen?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. One of my areas of interest is scholarly communication and trying to advance interest in open access publishing among my colleagues, as well as, of course, the broader college. But among my colleagues, I think many of them are very much on board. And there's a number of things that a library can do. We can, as a department, decide that we will change our own, we'll issue a resolution supporting open access and do something that it's ultimately just a statement of, this is a cool thing to do. But I really wanted to get us to think about our tenure and promotion guidelines, and that is like a real third rail of most academic discussions about changing those in a meaningful way. And one of the things I think that will really help advance open access efforts is when tenure and promotion takes into account open access efforts and supports those and maybe gives a gold star for those who seriously engage with it in their own publication efforts. We don't have a mandate for open access at Baruch or let alone CUNY. It'd be great if we did. So at the very least, I feel like we can be pushing our own tenure and promotion committees to rethink that. And I've sensed from my own colleagues that they were kind of on board with that. They kind of saw that, but they said, well, but the rest of the faculty, they're not ready for that yet. They're going to freak out, if we start talking about bonus points for publishing in a gold open access journal or taking the time to put all your works in a repository. And I said, just wait, we're not there yet to go there. But and so it was a time I had to stand down because it was just me. There's a few other people that were probably as fired up about it. But in the, I need to be doing more bridge building across the campus. I think if I really want to get this to go any further.
So you haven't totally stopped doing it, you just re-strategized maybe and sort of pivoted and manipulated the way that you did it into a different way instead of, so it's building that coalition again that was talked about.
There's also a technological issue too, is that we don't have an CUNY-wide institutional repository yet. It's coming, it's been coming for a long time. I won't get into CUNY politics, but it's not the library that's holding up the boat. But we've been waiting for it, so it's a little hard to advocate to tell CUNY faculty, oh, we really should do this when we don't have a good place for them to deposit their own materials. And we can say, yeah, you can put it in the subject repository or here or there, but we really need to have our own place for that. So that also is something we need to take care of first.
Yeah. Overcoming or?
I could say that there haven't been a lot of barriers within the libraries. I was confused when I was asked to be on this panel because I don't really think of myself as a leader, but it's true that my own kind of irrational exuberance and my self-promotion have caused Columbia to be seen as a leader in collecting, in kind of respecting comics and respecting the history of this medium in this industry, even though we're not only not the first academic library to collect, but we're not even the first Ivy League library to collect. Yale had a collection long before ours. And any effectiveness I've had has really been by developing this incredibly broad network of connections with cartoonists, with publishers, with other scholars, with other librarians, with cultural institutions, with art schools, etc. But the one real barrier I had I've had is trying to get deeper penetration into the academic departments on this campus. Not so much in using the collection. When I started it, I wasn't aware of anybody who was actually teaching with comics. And gradually, some of these faculty kind of came out of the closet, and 2 years ago, we had the first course taught by tenured faculty dedicated to the history of the American graphic novel, which couldn't have been taught if this collection didn't already exist. But I have cartoonists, incredible teachers, some who are teaching at Harvard, some who are teaching at MIT, who are saying, hey, I live in New York, can Columbia get me a job? Can I do a workshop? Can I do a course? Really gifted teachers, but the barrier I've encountered is dealing with the academic departments and getting them to take that notion seriously, and I've yet to succeed at that.
That's interesting. You want to weigh in?
Sure. I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction, though, in my answer, and it's a little bit more personal. When I got into librarianship, I was very, very lucky to have very early mentors that saw leadership potential and said, let's go, Tiger. And so maybe because I'm outgoing, I jumped on the opportunity, but blessed with genes, I looked very, very young when I first started. So I encountered some ageism, and it was difficult to overcome because I did have fantastic mentors who were just really, trying to give me great opportunities that a lot of the librarians who had been there for a much longer time than I had been there weren't having. So it was difficult. And so when I was given an opportunity to be put in an interim head position for a little while, I actually had colleagues say to me, face to face, it's not fair because you don't have the experience because you're not old enough. And so that was really difficult to encounter. So I had to realize that while I felt like I was ready, on an energetic kind of level to take the bull by the horns and use those opportunities to move forward in my career, that I really had to take a few steps back and move a lot more slowly, than what my mentors felt that I needed to, but just so that I could work a lot more collaboratively and get more buy-in from the staff that I was had been working at a peer level with, but then going to an interim department head level. So that's kind of a more personal take to that question, but it was a barrier and then a huge learning experience that's really served me well.
Absolutely. I've got one more question, but if people wanted to, if you do have questions that you've come up with, if you wanted to go ahead and start making your way to the microphones, that'll give us an idea of how much time to allot for questions. So if you do have questions, go ahead and start your way there. The last question I wanted to ask is sort of about institutional culture and where you see that coming from. Does it come from the top? Does it come from the bottom? Does it come from the middle? Where in your institution, in your organization, does the support for leadership come? Do you have support to develop as a leader? What has been your experience? Is it top down, bottom up?
I'm going first on this one.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
So I've been at Yale for 8.5 years now, and it's a complex, to say the least, organization. And I've had several supervisors. We've had different university librarians. We've had different AULs. And I have to say that our culture has changed based on each of those people coming in. So I can't really say that there's an overall culture that we've seen, a shift from this person leaving to the next person, but you can really see those changes in cultures at all level. I mean, the culture in the department unit area that I work in is very, very different in terms of support for developing, and providing leadership and management opportunities than, say, Unit X, or even at the UL, AUL level. So it's very, very different. And if somebody were to ask me what's the culture of your organization, I would say give me the day of the week, and I can tell you. But.
And that might be something that's important for people in a leadership role to hear and to understand that, and maybe to ask themselves, do you want to have an organizational culture, and what will that culture be when somebody at another part of the organization is asked that question. I mean, that's something that I think a lot of heads of libraries ought to be thinking about, and then it's a question of how do you then implement that. Do you want to go second, Karen?
Okay, let me think this through as I stare into Damon's eyes.
Earmuffs for a little while.
I think
avoided mine. Makes you feel better.
I think that Columbia libraries have evolved into more. No, that's not true. I think that. Well, I'm just thinking of our previous university librarian, which was very top down. I think it was just top. It was just top. I don't think there was any down. But I think that we are, to a certain extent, still a very top down organization. But I also feel that individual people here have been able to reach into that structure and make suggestions and give feedback. And I really feel like my own trajectory here is evidence of that, to reinvent themselves, reinvent their departments. I love librarianship for that facility to allow reinvention, which I think is not a quality in a lot of professions. So I think that if people are willing to take the initiative to kind of infiltrate that top-down structure, they can still affect change. But I think primarily, most people see it as a top-down structure.
Interesting. Do you want to broach that with the CUNY system? Or?
Yeah, well, I can't really speak as well to the CUNY system because it's a odd creature. It's a loose federation.
Mm-hmm.
And what's also quite different about my experience from my fellow panelists is that Baruch is a tiny institution relative to Columbia and Yale. We have 23, 24 librarians total. It's an extremely flat organization, so it's kind of hard for me to characterize the organizational culture because it just seems so small. There's a chief librarian, there's 5 division heads, and then a whole bunch of librarians. So there is a lot of direction that comes from the top. The chief librarian is very encouraging about wanting to try new things, to be innovative. I don't know how he finds the funding for all the various technologies that we're able to get, but he does. It helps that he's also the CIO, so that helps steer some money our way. But a lot of the initiative does come from individual librarians just teaming up together. It's a less formal organization, so maybe we can get away with more of that. So a colleague and I just decided to have a bi-weekly or twice a month, I don't remember if bi-weekly is the same as bi-monthly, seminar, like a brown bag technology workshop thing. And it was a great way to get everyone talking about stuff. It was also great because the chief librarian would come and we could pick his brain or something like, okay, like, can you tell us about this thing you mentioned? And but there's a lot of sort of little efforts that just start up, like a couple of librarians team up together. They pitch their idea to the chief librarian. He asks a whole ton of really tough critical questions, and it's good because he really makes you think stuff through before he says yes. So I'd say that we are generally pretty open to innovation, but a lot of it's on us to come up with those projects, which can be a barrier too, because you have to. Sometimes it's nice to get nudged a little. It's easy to get set in your ways and think like, oh, I don't need to worry about that sort of project or that technology, and wait for someone else to tell you to start doing something. Or it might be our instruction program, like we really need to change how we do assessment and assess overall our information literacy program. So it does take a lot of individual initiative to get things going at a smaller organization, I think.
But don't you think that also makes you more nimble? I mean, it's a little bit like Elliott's clipper ships, right? You know, a smaller institution is going to be able to turn away from those rocks, perhaps faster than the big 6-masted institutions.
So I hear Baruch's the only place I've ever, only library I've ever worked at. So I
once heard Columbia Library is called a battleship. You know, we turn very slowly. So I don't see anybody standing up for questions quite yet. If you want to, please go ahead. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going. I was a kid whose dad read him Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People as a bedtime book.
Oh my God.
That tells you anything. And these other like weird human resources, like I'm sure some of the ones that we heard about earlier, if that had been around then. So, short question, but maybe a complicated answer. Do you each think of yourself as a leader?
I already answered that.
So you said no.
I said I don't.
Yeah.
I think Columbia is seen as a leader because of things that I've done, but I don't see, nobody reports to me. I'm not, I don't know. I have a high profile, but I don't know that is equivalent to being a leader. Okay. People know who I am, but that doesn't mean people are necessarily following, dancing to the tune I pipe.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Stephen?
For whatever it's worth, I think I have if I have any sort of a regard from others as a leader, it's just because of my online presence. I'm not sure how much of an influence I've had at my own institution or in CUNY per se, maybe a little bit with a chat reference in CUNY, but for me, I feel like I've really carved out a space for myself by being online. And I have to give credit back when I was in library school in 1999 to stumbling on Stephen Bell's Kept Up Librarian website, where he advocated all these techniques for staying on top of, and first he said it's really important to stay on top of things outside of the library world as well as within. And so I quickly established my own little beachhead online about digital reference services, and it amazed me how much of a, I still to this day don't understand quite how that little website became, that I had on digital reference, the teaching librarian, became something. But I guess I was there early on digital reference, so that did help. But
it filled the need.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the other piece.
But it led to so many things, like invitations to write articles, to speak. And so I put a lot of work into it, and over the years I've sort of expanded all the things I do online, blogging, and I have a little commonplace book where all the stuff that I read in my blog or in my feed reader, I try to take little snippets and share it back. But it's amazing how that network effect can really play out. And I bump into people all the time. I have friends around the world who are librarians, and for me, that's probably the most rewarding thing I've gotten as a librarian, is I can go to ALA or ACRL and bump into people I've never met before, but they've known me for years online. And so I guess in that sense, I feel like I'm leading just by, I'm not coming up with new ideas, I'm just sharing stuff that I thought was cool, but that seems to fill a need.
It's a very librarian thing to curate for other people, so that fits in.
That actually, it just made me think. I wrote an online column for 4.5 years every month about using comics in academia, and that got a lot of recognition that led to, becoming a member of the board of trustees at the Museum of Comic and Cartoon Art, and then on the board of directors of the Society of Illustrators, a judge at the Eisners, because it raised the profile. I think that online presence can't be overestimated. It makes an enormous difference. Yeah, sorry, that's all I wanted to say.
Did you want to weigh in? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So I would have said prior to about 2.5 weeks ago that I lead projects, but then oddly enough, I can't remember, I think it was Elliot that brought up 360 feedback. Sorry if I'm not appropriating that to the right person, but I just went through 360 feedback at exceptional leaders training at Yale a couple of weeks ago. So I guess as a result of that, I would now claim that I'm a leader, and not just because I attended leaders training, but more because of the feedback that I received from my peers and the people that I work with. It was clear that a lot of people do perceive me as a leader, which was great, and it has made me really think about my role and kind of claiming that word too in the context of what I do. So that's kind of a literal
owning it is
answer
very,
as well.
very important. So please.
Oh, actually, Jeffrey, if I could just,
yeah.
I want to add in one more thing about, I was just thinking about the being online. I think one thing that really I have to mention is just the value of networking outside of your institution.
Absolutely.
And over the years, for example, Metro has been a huge influence on me. And first by participating in various SIGs, and then I was the co-chair of of the virtual reference SIG for a long time. But the relationships I formed with librarians all around the city, and from the school librarians, the public librarians, the medical librarians I would never have bumped into, learned so much from them. And so like all the stuff online, it's not just like I want to share stuff, I want to learn stuff. But the networking locally too has been an immensely powerful thing for me. And so, I mean, we're completely blessed being here in New York City by having so many different librarians to hang out with and learn from. So that's another really important thing that can help with a whole lot of barriers as well, like just being able to, I mean, if you're in a small college town in North Dakota and there's no other libraries nearby, you're really gonna have to work hard on your online presence. But here we've got both the online opportunities, but the local stuff as well.
I think it's really important to think of yourself as part of a network. I once called myself a node in that network, and Jim Neal made fun of me for it, so I was like, I'll take it. Anyway, yeah, so over here.
Hi, my name is Nick Rabenhoft. I'm from the Educopia Institute. And my question is, I'm a fairly recent graduate from library school. What do you think is the role of library school in nurturing or cultivating an attitude that gets you ready to take some leadership?
Anybody want to?
Yeah,
Any library school instructors in the audience?
Well, I didn't go to library school. I do work with a lot of students who are in library school, though, and I think that's really interesting because I think they're coming and working with me and getting skills, you know, at a first level that they're not going to get in library school, which I think is kind of interesting. I think your question is a good one about fostering that leadership mentality, and I think it really is. I mean, from what we've heard, it's a mentality, right? And I think it's something that some people are going to be drawn to, other people will be forced into, and some people might never encounter it. I don't know if you would ever see like a leadership class, in library school. By all means, start one and teach one if you're really interested in it, though, I think. What do you guys think?
For me, it was all about a personal relationship I had as a research assistant to Marie Radford when she was at Pratt. I learned so much from her. Just watching what she did, I had no clue. I'd never been in academia before, had no clue how it worked. I knew I wanted to wind up in academic library, so she was a great proxy for the working life of an academic, watching how she prepared for conferences and presentations and publications she was doing, and inviting me to help her. So that sort of, even though I was doing work for her, it wasn't photocopying or tedious stuff, I was doing real research for her and helping her out. And that was hugely helpful for me, that sort of informal mentorship. I'm not sure, I took a library management class, and I can see that my instructor from 12 years ago is not here. It was not at all helpful. And I'm not sure, honestly, I think it's more of the informal mentoring that goes on that may be better than any sort of formal programs, but I don't know. I haven't given that much thought to library school.
I was in library school while I was working here as a supervisor. I was running the course reserves department, which is a wonderful place to work for your first job in a library because you deal with catalogers and reference librarians and acquisitions and faculty. I mean, you're really you're a node at the center of a lot of different elements of the library. And I have to say, I went to Rutgers and I found it tiresome beyond belief. I found it very heavily theoretical and almost not at all practical. I didn't feel I learned anything practical in library school. I felt that it was a socializing process, and it made me feel like I was part of a profession. And I think that that's an important thing. And now when I sit on search committees, I have to tell you, I still look for that MLS on people's, especially if it's a recent PhD who's applying for a library job. No offense, Jeffrey. I want to know that they're committed to being a librarian, and that MLS is one of those pieces of evidence that indicates it. So that's what sorry everybody, that's what library school is for me.
Okay, so I'd like to say two things about that. I was very fortunate in library school. I had fantastic mentors that actually gave me a lot of hands-on experience that told me, you know, I need to do a new core list in women's studies on, you know, technology, for example, that the women's studies librarian was responsible for. And she said, go do it.
Where'd you go?
University of Arizona, sorry. So I did, and she went, you know, through it with me at the end of the project and said, you know, okay, this is the right thing you should have done, this is what you overlooked, you know, and so it was a real learning process for me. The same with teaching. They actually let me go out to their English classes and do co-teaching with them, and then at the end of that internship, I did some teaching on my own, and you know, that's where the final grade came from. So I was really fortunate that I got to do a lot of that hands-on, you know, stuff as graduate assistantship and also as internships, because like you, the classes, there wasn't a whole lot there, and I also don't think there's anybody from University of Arizona here.
I mean, a question for you, just
Oh,
you can go
that's
back
right,
to the
Geraldine,
microphone.
we are.
Is that something you're hearing from people in library school? So your classmates in library school, were they yearning for more leadership training?
I wouldn't say so. We also had a management requirement, which was, of course, one of the most hated classes. And it's just, yeah, I often hear this thing of, you know, like I took leadership. I led like a student group or something. It's always like self-motivated, but to me, if you're paying all this money to this organization to give you some sort of stamp of approval, I want to be getting something back out of it. And with leadership being such an important component in something as changing as a library, that to me should be a responsibility that a library school takes on, but I don't know exactly how they try and foster that to every student that comes through. They don't just say, yeah, go take the initiative and, you know, become a leader yourself. Is there some way for them to reach out to the student and encourage them to do that, to develop those skills?
I mean, on the one hand, you know, maybe it's a matter of fostering these mentorship relationships where you don't quite know what's going to come out the other end of it, but you can at least set up a scenario where that's a possibility for somebody and then sort of follow that through and see where it goes. I mean, I can't speak for any library school administrators about what they should and shouldn't do, though.
I've seen a lot of interesting things going on at Metro with library school students showing up for either paid workshops or for the free SIGs, special interest groups, and people that would come regularly. And I think the library schools in Metro, like that's an obvious point of connection because they're, especially the SIGs, anyone can show up and learn about something that's you know, free to come, and basically everyone's welcome. Like if you run a SIG on any topic, like you're going to get people from all different kinds of libraries. So I would imagine for library school students, it's a great place to hang out and ask the questions and also get real practical experience about what's going on in libraries.
Thanks.
So I had one
Yeah,
thing I
please.
wanted. So one other thing, is Cheryl LaGuardia in the audience by any chance? Did anybody see her Library Journal column on professional development yesterday? So she did a poll. It's actually a really good article, and I printed it off because I figured there might be something in here. And it's called Professional Development, What's It to You? And she actually went about asking both practitioners in the library world and then also managers what their definition of professional development was. And it's very, very interesting because it runs the gamut. And but one thing actually that was brought up about library school students was that she says, or one of the quotes was, honestly, anything that kids are learning in library school per technologies is behind. They need to expand out to meetup groups or take supplemental online courses. The rest of what this individual says is very business school sounding. And so I thought that was very interesting to kind of hear from a manager's perspective, you know, what kind of skill sets the librarians should have coming out of library school. And like I said, it really sounds like students should be taking not just the library management class that's required, but more, you know, a couple of other classes, electives in a business school.
So to diversify the skill set.
Startups, agile environments, those kind
Absolutely,
of things.
design thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm wondering if you guys could speak to sort of managing and leading through the affective dimensions of change. We've talked a lot about and heard a lot about leadership as part of steering your big ship, and those in terms of change. And that comes with a lot of really material bad effects, like people losing their jobs, people having to share offices that never had to share them before, people's jobs being redefined and like all that stuff is like wrenching. So how do you deal with the sort of pain that comes from change?
It makes me think of when we first started doing chat reference at Baruch. There were a number of librarians that, they're like, okay, great, let me do the training. And they sat down for the first time, and they heard the little machines beeping at them and chiming, and they tensed up. And one of the best reference librarians I've ever met in my life, who trained me and taught me wonderful things. I don't know if I learned them all, but he tried to share with me wonderful things. He just was not comfortable at all doing chat. And initially, the plan was everyone was going to do chat. Like, we're going to do this. It's important. And then we realized, there's no point pushing him. He's just not going to be as good of a librarian in chat, which is already pretty high stress mode to be doing reference work, because there's a lot missing that we've come to rely on for doing reference work. And so we've let him opt out of it. And there's been a handful of people too who are like, okay, you know what? We don't all have to do this. Like, let's be flexible. And so there's a handful of people that just have never done chat. They just said, what? We looked at it. And so I think you have to respect that as well, and not try to force everyone to come along for the ride.
I think a lot depends on the people who are a level above you. I know here when we've had change, we've had often directors who are incredibly skilled at, reframing the change perhaps, making it sounds like I'm saying spinning it, and I don't mean spinning it. I mean thinking through all of the elements that are the consequences of that change and what ones are positives that we can emphasize, and kind of fostering a feeling of everybody still being in it together. And that is reassuring. And it's nice to be reassured. We're all still scared little kids inside, I guess. So if you've got people above you who are inflicting this change just willy-nilly without thinking of the consequences, then yeah, you're going to have a lot of heartbreak and pain and dissatisfaction and crankiness. But if you've got somebody who can really guide you through that and kind of foster cohesiveness in the organization, well, then you're pretty lucky.
Should I bring up the dreaded reorg? So when I said that the Center for Science and Social Science Information is a joint venture between university, ITS, and the libraries, it also combined two different units, being the science and the social science libraries, which had not been combined before. And because we were all going to go into one physical facility, and we knew it was going to be a reorg, there was a lot of nervousness from staff thinking, well, we definitely don't need as many staff to move into this combined service as we currently have in two different libraries. So we really needed to think, and we did think very creatively about how we could rethink the jobs that we did need in a combined service space without laying off people. And we ended up really I think doing a good job in, redefining these job descriptions and appropriately matching staff that had at least some of those tasks, things that they were already able to do in their existing job descriptions, and transferring those skills into the new job descriptions. It ended up that we didn't have to lay off as many people as we thought we were going to have to lay off. And we just made sure that there were a lot of conversations with staff through the process. So that's not saying that it took away all of the bad stuff. I mean, it was still incredibly hard for everybody, managers, staff at all level. But I think it's just the key is really good communication, providing training and making sure that you're going to provide whatever, the staff needs to get through the bumpy parts. That helps.
That's the best note ever to end a panel discussion on. So thank you all very much. We hope you enjoyed the panel. We'll all be here throughout the rest of the day, I hope, and so thank you again.